I am Charles Yoon. I am the president of the Korean American Association of Greater New York, uh, also known as CAGNY. CAGNY represents the interests of approximately 500,000 Koreans and Korean Americans who reside in the Greater New York area. I'd like to thank Judy Yu, the president of the Federation of Korean American Association in Northeast. And I would like to also thank 장원삼 총영사님, the Consul General of the Republic of Korea to New York. So my first experience living in the United States was in the suburbs of Chicago and Kenilworth, Illinois, and I lived there for a year. Thereafter, I came back again to attend Lawrenceville, which is a boarding school in New Jersey, and since then, I've been continuously in the United States. After Lawrenceville, I attended Columbia College, and after Columbia College, I ended up at Columbia Law School. Part of my motivation for attending law school was because of my interest in human rights. I wanted to make a difference, and pursuing law seemed to be a way to do that. So after Columbia Law School, I ended up joining a law firm called Reed and Priest. It was a 200-lawyer, white shoe, New York City law firm, and I started out as a litigation associate. And I did a lot of work for the FDIC as outside counsel. But at the same time, in part due to my fluency in Korean and my fluency in Korean culture, I was sort of naturally recruited to the Korea practice group, if you will. And so at a relatively early stage in my career as a junior associate, I started working on matters involving Korean conglomerates like Samsung and Hyundai. I also naturally fell into doing international arbitration because many disputes that involved Korean companies and US companies went to arbitration. So at Reed and Priest, which then became Thiel and Reed and Priest, I became a partner, and I was made a partner in the litigation department. So that was part of what I did as a lawyer, and the law firm underwent some changes, and I started to think about my long-term plans, and I decided to start my own law firm, and that was a way to be, perhaps a little bit more hands-on in controlling all aspects of client service and billing with respect to the legal services. So I started a firm initially called Yoons, Kim, and So. It was basically 4 lawyers, Korean Americans, who came together to practice law, and also in part to better serve the community. I definitely saw that there was a need for perhaps a more big firm style representation in the Korean American community at that time. So I thought that I could offer such quality services at a lesser price point than that was being offered by big firms. And that would also lead to better quality services naturally for the Korean American community. So that was in part my motivation for starting my own law firm. I think it was definitely an advantage because I had that fluency in Korean language, and because I had the fluency in Korean culture, I was able to better understand the client, and I was also able to better analyze the dispute that the client was facing. Since I was a litigation attorney, I needed to understand all aspects and ramifications of a particular dispute at hand, and it certainly helped that I spoke Korean and that I had a cultural fluency in Korean business culture. So, that I owe to sort of the way I was raised by my parents. Even though I attended school and spoke English most of the time, we spoke Korean at home. And in part, I also attribute my continued learning of Korean to my days in Cameroon, Africa. I lived in Africa for 3 years during, when I was from 5th grade through 8th grade. I guess 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, I was growing up in Cameroon, and there was no television in Cameroon at that time. So, my sort of sole source of entertainment was reading books. And at the ambassador's residence in Cameroon, there were only Korean books. And there were a lot of great Korean books. In fact, even Shakespeare was all translated into Korean. So I ended up reading a lot in Korean. Part of how I was able to maintain my Korean fluency was by reading during those formative years. I was a nerdy kid. I think right now the value that I provide is being able to sort of translate, if you will, between two cultures of the first generation and the second generation. And I suppose some people think that I am 1.5 generation. I'm sort of neither first nor second in a way. And by being fluent in both Korean and English, I'm able to perform that bridge role between the two communities and two cultures, if you will. Yeah, I think certainly there are a lot of challenges. First of all, the first generation feels comfortable really communicating in Korean only, and second generation feel comfortable speaking in English only. So, right there you have a communication barrier, if you will. Also, the things that a first generation person values are different than what the second generation person typically values. So there is definitely a gap. But what I saw was that there was tremendous potential for community building if the two generations could come together. In a way, we are just one community, but I think there's a danger that the community might sort of develop in separate ways. Well, I would tell them to look at the potential, not only for the growth of the community, but for their own personal growth as well. We all serve in one way or another, and I think it's very rewarding to serve the broader community. And right now, the parents and the grandparents of the second generation and third generation Korean Americans have really worked hard to build a community here in the United States. And I think that, if you find some way to continue that legacy so that your talents, whatever you have to offer, are in some ways could be utilized to better the community, I think it will be obviously very beneficial for the community, but also very personally rewarding for yourself as well. So I would say, take an interest on things that are going on around you, and also find a way to serve. I think each of us should find a cause that is greater than ourselves and find a way to serve. And I would say that if you are interested in serving the Korean American community and the community at large, I would urge you to look at organizations that are out there and consider joining one of the organizations and attending a seminar or a webinar or an event. And I think just by virtue of the fact that you're watching this program, I think you're well on your way.